The debt was her husband's. Jemima Hargrove stood barefoot in the doorway of the only home she'd known as a married woman, her hands curled like claws around the raw edge of her belly, swollen and angry with life. Wind soured with ash blew across the dirt yard, lifting her skirt against her calves. She was 21, widowed 3 months, and in the seventh month of a pregnancy that had already nearly killed her twice. They came on horseback at dawn. 3 men, one with a ledger, one with a whip, and one who never dismounted. The one with the ledger, a lean man with a silver tooth and ink-stained fingers, read aloud the figures that had damned her. $12 for seed that never sprouted, 20 for the broken axle repair, 48 for the horse, dead from heat stroke last July, all signed by Luke Hargrove in a shaky, slanted hand. "Your man was deep in the hole," the silver-toothed man said, not unkindly. "Ain't no property here worth the collection but you." Jemima didn't cry. The baby shifted inside her, a hot iron rolling under her ribs. She stared at the man with the whip, whose mouth hung crooked from a wound long healed, and asked in a voice scraped raw with salt, "Where you taking me?" "Dust down," he said. "You'll fetch a decent tag there. Some folk like M full with child. Don't ask me why." She turned once to look at the house. The roof sagged, door hanging by a single hinge. Luke's grave was a half-mile off. Under a crooked tree the lightning had split. She buried him with her own hands after the fever took him. Now those same hands were bound behind her, tight enough to make the baby kick in protest. They loaded her into a wagon with iron slats on the sides. Her knees struck the boards with every jolt. By dusk, her wrists were bleeding. Dustdown was a rusted artery of a place, a slit in the belly of the prairie. It pulsed with the stink of sweat and rot and coal. Children with ringworm begged on the corners. Pigs roamed unclaimed. The women inside the brothel wore lace sewn over bruises and smiled like it hurt. The men who'd taken her sold her to a place called Mother Brune. The woman who ran it was broad and blonde and had a voice like burned sugar. "She'll be good for the sympathy crowd," Mother Brune said, hands cupping Jemima's belly like it was some kind of offering. "1 or 2 turns before she drops, then we milk the newness. Folk'll pay to see the birth if it goes slow. Get a midwife in there with a low-cut blouse, make it a whole show." Jemima said nothing. Her room was a cell with curtains for a door. There were bloodstains on the mattress, and the piss pot was half full when she arrived. They gave her water and 1 bowl of broth per day. She was allowed to wash her face, not her body. The first man came the next night. He didn't touch her. He only stared at her, pulled a chair close and sat, watching her hands tremble on her knees. She thought about breaking the chair over his head, but if she was punished, the baby would suffer too. 2 weeks passed. In that time, Jemima saw 12 men, 1 woman, and heard 2 births through the thin walls. She bled once and thought the child was coming early, but it stopped by morning. Mother Brune liked her quietness. "You're the haunted type," she said, pinning up Jemima's hair. "Folk want to feel like they're reaching into something broken, makes them feel less shattered themselves." Jemima looked into the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were sunken, the green gone gray. Her lips had gone pale as if even color had abandoned her. "You keep still like that," Brune said. "You might just survive this place." But Jemima didn't want to survive, not like this. In the hour before dawn, she scratched Luke's name into the wall with a sliver of glass and whispered to the baby, told it stories of the creek, of the birdsong that used to wake her. She promised the child she'd get them free, even if it cost her blood. Then came the man with the scar. He didn't come as a client, he came with coin. A hard-looking man with dark eyes and darker hair, he spoke to Brune in low tones. Jemima watched through a slit in the curtain. The man kept glancing toward her corner, though he never looked her full in the face. "Can't just buy her straight," Brune hissed. "She's still fresh. Belly's full makes her special. You want her for work, for keep. She's got weeks left, and I can triple what you offer before the birth." The man said nothing, only dropped a folded square of cash on the table. Brune's eyes flicked over it, and her fingers twitched. "She's yours, but you'll take her now, and if the child dies, it ain't on my conscience." That night he led her out through the back, gave her a coat and didn't touch her. When she staggered from the pain in her hips, he lifted her without asking and carried her to a wagon with high wooden sides. He said his name was Eli Wren. He had a scar on his jaw like he'd caught a blade in a drunken fight. His voice was low, quiet, like it was still deciding whether to trust itself. "I ain't your owner," he said, "and I ain't gonna touch you. You'll rest first, then we'll ride. I know a place past the ridge where folks don't ask questions." She didn't believe him, but she didn't resist either. Her body was too far gone for fight. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. The road cut black through the prairie, and the moon burned a hole in the sky. She leaned her head against the side of the wagon, one hand over her belly, the other clenched around the hem of her sleeve. She did not know Eli Wren, but something in his silence felt like a promise. And she'd learned long ago, when the world stripped you naked and called it justice, that even a promise made by a stranger might be the only mercy left. They rode 3 days west, then turned north where the road split. No towns, no posts, just wind and the grating rhythm of wheels on dry ground. Eli didn't talk unless she asked. Even then, his answers were short. He gave her food without fuss, smoked meat, bread hard as bone, dried berries soaked soft in water. He didn't look away when she winced climbing down. He didn't ask about what had been done to her. That, she found, she was grateful for. At night, she slept beneath the wagon while he watched the fire, his rifle balanced on his knee. His eyes never drifted toward her. He treated her like a wounded animal, a thing too close to breaking to be touched. The pain in her hips got worse. By the time they reached the cabin, she was near crawling. It sat in a notch between two hills, sheltered from the wind and mostly hidden by bare trees. The roof was good, chimney solid, a fence half buried in snow curled around a frozen garden plot. Inside, the place smelled of old leather and lye soap. Eli helped her to the bed without speaking. Jemima laid there for hours while he moved through the room with careful quiet, lighting the stove, filling a basin, cutting strips of cloth. It was night again when she finally asked, voice dry as gravel, "Why?" He looked up from the fire. "I owed your husband." The words were plain, without weight. She blinked. "Luke didn't speak of you." "He wouldn't have. He didn't like me much." Jemima studied him. The fire threw shadows across his face, deepening the hollows beneath his eyes. His hands were rough and stained, like a man who worked with things that fought back. "You bought me to pay a debt," she said. Eli didn't answer right away. "Then I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." It was a clean thing to say, neat, but it didn't fit what she knew of the world. She looked down at her belly, where the baby shifted restless, like it too was listening. "That debt cost you more than I'm worth." He didn't argue. That night she dreamed of water, cold and black and rising. She stood waist-deep in it, the baby in her arms, and heard Luke calling her from the shore, though his voice was wrong, thin and fading. When she turned to look, he was already gone. The birth came during the second snow. The sky had gone white for days, and the air carried the smell of wood smoke and coming pain. She woke in the dark, the sheets beneath her soaked, the first scream torn out of her before she even knew it was hers. Eli didn't panic. He'd already brought the midwife, a gray-haired woman named Sarnie from 2 ridges over. She'd been staying since the signs showed early. Sarnie worked with her sleeves rolled and face set like flint. "You'll bleed bad," she said after the first hour. "Too thin, baby, turned wrong." Jemima bit the leather strap Eli gave her and saw stars. By morning, she'd torn through the world and come back changed. The baby, a boy with wet black hair and a scream like a snapped wire, was laid against her chest. Sarnie stitched her in silence. "You were lucky," the midwife muttered. "Could have gone to the dirt, both of you." Jemima didn't feel lucky. She felt split open and hollow, as if something sacred had burned its way through her. She slept, she woke. She bled more than she should have. The baby cried at night, and Eli walked with him, awkward but willing. Days passed, weeks. By spring, her body remembered how to move again. Her hands grew calloused with work. She boiled cloth, hauled water, chopped what she could. The boy, she called him Nels, took to laughing when the wind stirred the pine boughs. Still, she didn't ask Eli why he stayed. And he didn't ask her anything at all. One day, she found the letters. They were under the floorboard near the stove, tied with string, dirt-stained at the edges. Luke's name was on most. A few were hers, letters she'd written years back when he first went west to find work. None had reached him. She opened the last one. The handwriting was hers, sharp and neat. Luke, I'm near due and I'm scared. The roof leaks and I think the fever's come back in my bones. Come home, I won't ask again. Tears came, hot and unexpected. Where'd you find these? She asked Eli that night. Brune had a drawer full, he said. Letters never sent. I took what had your name. She didn't thank him, but she left the last letter open on the table, beside a plate of stew he hadn't touched yet. By summer, the snow had vanished, and with it, the silence between them. Eli began talking more, just small things, how to tend the garden, where the fox den lay, how the wolves called sometimes at dusk but never came close. He didn't say what he did before the war or what sins rode on his back, but Jemima knew there were things in him no fire would burn out. Still, she found herself watching him, the way he moved, the way he looked at Nels like the boy was a thing he didn't quite believe in. One night after the baby had gone quiet, she said, "You knew Luke, but you didn't like him, so why take his burden?" Eli sat still for a long time. "He once saved my life," he said finally. "Didn't want to, but he did. That don't mean you owed him me. I didn't do it for him." That stopped her. She looked at the fire, then at Eli, and found his eyes on her, steady and unflinching. "I used to come by the homestead," he said. "When he was gone, rode past on the ridge, saw you working the land, hauling stone, mending fence, I thought." He didn't finish. "You thought what?" "That no one ever saw how strong you were." She didn't know what to say. Her heart beat hard in her chest, angry and afraid. She remembered the brothel, the ledger, the men who treated her like meat, and this man who had paid to set her free and never once touched her without cause. "I ain't ready," she said, voice low, "if you mean what I think you do." "I'll wait," he said, "or I'll leave, just say." She didn't say anything. But when she rose to feed Nels and her fingers brushed his hand, she didn't pull away. And that night, as the wind crept through the cracks in the wall and the trees whispered old things outside, Jemima Hargrove sat beside the man who had bought her freedom, and for the first time in her life didn't feel owned. The cabin took on the smell of growing things. Spring bled into summer with thick heat and hard rains. Jemima hung strips of rabbit along the porch rail and watched vines curl up the fence posts like they were hungry for sky. Nels learned to sit upright, then to crawl, fingers quick and curious. He pulled everything into his mouth, pebbles, leaves, a bent spoon she thought she'd thrown out. Eli built a coop and brought home hens. He fixed the chimney, dug a new wellhead, caught a fox by the hind leg when it nosed too close to the smokehouse. He worked like a man who had no time to think. Jemima worked too, but her thoughts caught in her chest more often than she liked. She couldn't forget how it had started, the sale, the shame, the quiet hands that reached for her in the dark. The world had no shortage of cruelty, and it never gave without asking something in return. So she watched Eli. He never asked, not for her touch, not for the child, not even for thanks. He moved around her like she was something sacred and half-wild, and some days she hated him for it, hated that he gave her room when part of her wanted someone to demand something, to make her feel seen even when she was torn and mean inside. But then Nels would cry, and Eli would hold him, face unreadable but gentle, and Jemima's hate would fall apart like wet paper. By the end of July, a rider came. She saw him from the corn rows, a speck against the ridge, dust plume trailing behind like smoke. Eli stepped outside with his rifle. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "No." He said nothing else. The rider didn't smile. A man in a brown coat, face pale and sharp, boots too clean for someone who'd ridden far. "You Eli Wren?" the man asked, voice flat. Eli didn't answer. "I got a message," the rider said, "from Dustdown." At that, Jemima felt her belly tighten, though the child had long since left it. The man handed over an envelope sealed in red wax. Eli broke it with one hand and read without blinking. When he was done, he tossed it into the fire. The man waited. Eli said, "You can go back now." I was told to bring an answer. Eli gave him one, a single bullet fired clean into the dirt near the man's left foot. The rider went pale, turned his horse, and left without another word. Jemima waited until the sun dipped before asking. "They want money," he said. "Brune, she didn't like losing you. They mean to take me back. They'll try." The wind picked up. The baby stirred in his cradle. "We can run," she said. "No, they'll follow." She sat down on the step beside him, feeling the ache rise in her ribs again, the one that never quite left, the one that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with memory. "Then we fight." He looked at her, something breaking open in his gaze, soft and startled like he didn't expect her to stand with him. "I don't know what I am to you," she said, "but I ain't going back to chains." Eli nodded. That night they moved the child's cradle to the root cellar, boarded up windows, oiled weapons. She took the revolver Luke had once hidden under the bed, cleaned it with hands that no longer shook. The fight came 5 days later. It started with fire. They lit the barn first. The smoke woke her. She saw the red flickering against the ceiling and was out of bed before she'd finished breathing. Eli was already outside, rifle shouldered, silhouette lit in orange. 5 men, one she recognized from Dustone, the whip-scarred bastard who had first tied her wrists. She didn't scream, she aimed. The first bullet hit a man in the shoulder, spun him like a drunk. He fell into the trough and didn't rise. Eli dropped another before the group fanned out, using trees for cover. One came too close. Jemima didn't hesitate. She caught him behind the shed, fired once into his gut, then again when he tried to crawl. Her dress soaked in blood not her own, her heart beat like thunder in a box. She found herself smiling, not from joy, but from something deeper, an animal certainty that she would not die here. The whip-scarred man breached the porch. Eli tackled him, slammed his head against the railing once, twice, until the skull cracked. By morning, 3 lay dead. 1 crawled off with a shattered leg. The 5th they buried with a broken neck. Jemima washed her hands in the creek until her knuckles bled. That night Eli sat beside her on the step. They didn't speak. He reached for her hand. This time she let him take it. In the days after, word traveled. Brune sent no more men. Some said she died herself, sick with fever. Others whispered she'd been killed by a girl she'd once tried to sell. Jemima didn't ask for truth, she had her own. And as the heat settled and the days grew long, she found herself standing beside Eli at the edge of the field, watching the stalks rise. Nels slept in the sling across her chest. Eli rested his hand on the back of her neck, fingers rough but warm. She still didn't know what they were, husband and wife or something quieter. But she knew this, he'd come for her when no one else had. Not because he needed her, not because she asked, but because, long before she saw herself as more than ruined, he already had. Autumn came like a blade, quick and cold. The fields withered, trees turned brittle and gold. Jemima strung root vegetables from the rafters and salted what meat they could spare. Nels was walking now, half stumbling, fists full of leaves and mud. His laughter came easier than sleep. At night he called out, sometimes for her, sometimes for things he couldn't name. She knew the sound of nightmares. They lived quiet but not hidden. Folks passed through the hills, sometimes stopping for trade, sometimes shelter. Rumors followed them in. "You're the woman Brune sold," said one man, a trapper with teeth black as coal. "Heard you shot her men like dogs." Jemima didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own story now. Eli watched every visitor like they carried sickness. He never stopped preparing. Firewood stacked high, traps set past the ridge. He walked the perimeter at dusk with a lantern and rifle, boots silent in the frostbit grass. But it wasn't fear that lived in him. It was habit, the kind born from years expecting the worst. Jemima knew that kind of waiting, too. She woke one morning to find Nels gone from his crib. Her heart locked in her throat. She threw open the door. and found him seated in the dirt, Eli kneeling beside him, pointing toward the trees. "Coyote tracks," he said. "Small one, likely hungry." Nels babbled something and slapped the ground. Eli didn't look at her right away. When he did, it was with that same unshaken calm he always wore, but something in it cracked. "You thought he was taken," he said quietly. "I thought," she stopped. "I've had things stolen from me before." He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "You won't lose him," he said. "Not while I breathe." It was a vow simple and brutal, not born of romance, born of need. And maybe that was better. Winter arrived early. The child grew sick. It started with a cough, then fever, then the wheeze that wouldn't leave. His eyes turned glassy, lips pale. Jemima sat up 3 nights straight, cloth soaked in willow bark, whispering lullabies she didn't remember learning. "I can ride to town," Eli said. "Bring back medicine." She shook her head. "You won't make it through the pass. The snow was too thick, the ice too thin." "I'll go on foot." "You'll die." "Then I'll go halfway." They argued until the lantern went low. Then she cried, sudden and violent, clutching Nels against her chest like she could press the sickness out of him. Eli knelt beside her, took her face in his hands. "Jem," he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name. "He's strong like you." She hadn't felt strong in weeks. But the boy didn't die. He burned through the fever in a blaze of breath and sweat, and woke one morning hungry. Jemima laughed when he reached for her spoon, a dry, cracked laugh that bled into sobs. Eli didn't say a word, just laid a hand on her back and stayed there. Snow trapped them for a month. It was the closest thing to peace she'd known. They slept together now, though nothing passed between them but breath and warmth. His hand found hers under the quilt without thought. She stopped pulling away. There was no name for what they were. No minister, no ring. Only memory and firelight, and the sound of Nels breathing beside them. Some nights she thought of Luke, not with guilt, with clarity, the way he'd smiled without knowing what for. The way he'd held her like a man hoping the world would change just because he wanted it to. Eli never asked the world for anything. He just survived it. And somehow, in surviving, he made space for her to do the same. When spring broke, she walked the land alone. The frost had fled, buds broke like bruises from the trees. The air smelled wet with life. She walked to the edge of the ridge, Nels strapped to her back, looked down at the river that cut through the valley like a scar. She could have left. That thought came sharp. She wasn't bound here, not by contract, not by chain. She could take the boy and vanish, start again. But as she looked out over the land, rough and raw and beautiful in its refusal to be tamed, she realized she didn't want new. She wanted real. This land. This child. This man who had never spoken love aloud, but lived it in everything he did. She walked back slow, the baby breathing against her spine, and when she reached the cabin, Eli was outside with an axe, shirt damp with sweat. She watched him a long time. When he saw her, he paused. She stepped forward, not as someone owned, not as someone saved, but as someone who had saved herself. "Eli," she said, "if I stay, really stay, it ain't out of gratitude." He nodded. "I know. It ain't out of debt." "I know." She looked at him, and for once, he looked away. "I can't give you all of me," she said. "Some of it's still broken, might always be." "I don't want all of you," he said, "just the part you're willing." Then he opened the door for her, and she stepped inside. The summer that followed came heavy with rain. The earth turned soft and rich, and the garden grew faster than they could tend it. Beans climbed the trellis. Squash spilled into the rows like gold. Jemima worked the field with Nels on her hip and a rifle strapped across her back. She no longer flinched at the sound of hooves in the distance. Her hands, once delicate, had thickened with scar and callus. The child took to the woods, walking on his own, fearless. Eli carved him a whistle. Jemima taught him how to plant seed. She had not spoken of dustdown in months, but it lived behind her teeth. Late one evening, after the sky cracked with lightning and the river rose, a stranger came again. He wore black, no hat, his beard was short, his boots wet. He came on foot, unarmed from what she could see. Eli was already on the porch, rifle angled down but ready. Jemima stepped out behind him, wiping her hands on her apron. The man looked at her first, then the child, then back again. "You the Hargrove woman." She said nothing. He nodded to himself, slow and deliberate. "Brune's dead, that part's true. She took a bullet from someone close. Might have been kin, might have been one of her own girls, doesn't matter." Eli didn't relax his grip. "What does matter," the man continued, "is the debt died with her. The brothel burned last month. Duston's got new trouble. You won't be followed again." Jemima stepped forward. "You come all this way just to say that?" The man's mouth twisted, almost a smile. "No, ma'am, I came to see for myself. Heard rumors. A woman sold with child, bought by a man with a war past and nothing left to lose. They said she carved her place into the hills and turned her ghosts to roots." She met his eyes. "I ain't carved anything," she said. "I just didn't die." He tipped his head. "Sometimes that's the story." With that, he turned and left. Weeks passed without incident. The cabin held. The land did not betray them. One night, as stars swelled overhead, Eli found her by the fence. She was holding Luke's last letter. She kept it in a tin beside the hearth. Read it once a season. "You think he'd be proud?" she asked. Eli considered that a long while. "I think he'd be surprised." She laughed, sharp, honest. "Surprised I lived." "No," Eli said, "surprised you did it better without him." She folded the letter once, then again, and set it into the fire. The flames took it fast. The following spring, she married Eli. No priest, no paper. Just a quiet vow under a dogwood tree, the baby in her arms and dirt beneath her nails. He slid a ring onto her finger, a simple brass band, melted down from a cartridge casing. "I don't need promises," she told him. He said, "It ain't a promise, it's proof." Years passed, the boy grew, the land held. And when neighbors spoke of the woman in the ridge cabin, the one who shot 3 men, birthed a child in blood, and married a man with ruin in his eyes, they said she was quiet but dangerous. Said she had been bought once, but never again. They called her the widow who won. But Jemima didn't think of it that way. She thought of mornings, soft and slow, with coffee in her hand and Eli fixing fence posts before the sun crested. She thought of a child who never knew the smell of brothels or the sting of hunger. She thought of herself not as victorious, but simply here. And after all she had lost, all she had clawed back, here was more than enough.